Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Let's return to our top story now, and the diplomatic fallout between Russia and the United Kingdom has rumbled on. What started as briefings in the House of Commons have morphed into explicit tweets with no uncertainty of who each country is blaming, as we've learnt more about the Skripals poisoning. So let's have a look at the war of words between the two countries. First, on the 4th of April, the Foreign Office admitted to deleting a Twitter post on Russia's culpability over the Salisbury spy poisoning. The tweet claimed UK experts had proved the nerve agent was produced in Moscow, saying analysis by world-leading experts at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down made clear that this was a military-grade Novichok nerve agent produced in Russia. Porton Down is an OPCW-accredited and designated laboratory. Then Boris Johnson took to Twitter after pressure from Jeremy Corbyn, saying it's lamentable that Jeremy Corbyn is now playing Russia's game and trying to discredit the UK over the Salisbury attack. Let's remember the key facts. Porton Down identified nerve agents as military-grade Novichok. 2. Russia has investigated delivering nerve agents likely for assassination, and as part of this programme has produced and stockpiled small quantities of Novichoks. 3. Russia has motive for targeting Sergei Skripal. 28 other countries have been so convinced by UK case they have expelled Russians. In contrast, Jeremy Corbyn chooses to side with the Russian spin machine. Well, yesterday, Russian TV aired a recording of an alleged phone conversation between Yulia Skripal and her cousin. Meanwhile, 33-year-old Ms. Skripal released a statement through the Met saying her strength was growing daily.
Алло.
Алло.
Алло, ты слышишь?
Я слышу.
Это Юль Скрипаль.
Ой, Юлька, ты, господи, я слышу по голосу, что это ты, я понять не могу. Тебе дали телефон, да?
Да.
Ой, слава богу, господи, Юляш, у тебя все нормально у тебя?
Нормально, все хорошо.
Смотри, если я завтра получу визу, я к тебе в понедельник прилечу.
Визу никто не даст, Вик.
Ну и, в общем, это я тоже так думаю. Все, ладно. Вот,
всего.
Нет, да, тут это. Если дадут, то это. Мне надо, чтобы ты сказала, что могу я тебя видеть или нет, сказала слово «да».
Well, the Russian ambassador to the UK, Alexander Yakovenko, explained his delight for Yulia's health, but remained firm that Russia had nothing to do with the nerve agent attack.
I'm really happy, and I hope that the Sergei Skripal will also recover. And I'm quite sure that one day Yulia will come back to Moscow, where she has job, partners. You know, she's a wealthy person, and she's doing well. As far as the father, that's his choice. You know, he decided to live here in the UK, no problem, because you know, from the point of the Russian state, Russia has no problems with him. These people were poisoned, and they are Russian citizens, and the criminal case is open in Russia. So we want to know the truth, and it's very serious. We have a lot of suspicions about Britain. You know, if you take the, let's say, last 10 years, so many Russian citizens died here in the UK under very strange circumstances.
Well, this all comes as the hospital treating Sergei Skripal revealed today he is no longer in a critical condition following last month's nerve agent attack. Well, we can talk now to the former UN chemical weapons inspector and security consultant, Jerry Smith, who joins us from Salisbury. Jerry, really good to talk to you. It's been a remarkable week, hasn't it? Your reaction to the improvements in Sergei Skripal's condition?
Yeah, good afternoon. Well, I think the first positive thing we should do is say that that's very good news that his condition is improving, and of course this may well be quite a significant point, not only for his health but also for the investigation, because if he gets into a position where he can actually talk to investigators and give them more information, then clearly this investigation may well advance quite significantly.
Does it raise questions about whether it was Novichok that was actually used?
Well, sorry, can you say that again? I've got a siren going past me.
Sure. Does it raise questions about whether it was Novichok that was actually used?
Well, I think, Porton Down was quite explicit that it was Novichok nerve agents. Of course, Novichok is a family of agents, it's not one specific one, and I have absolutely no doubt that the quality of the laboratory and their staff up there is that they've identified that as it is. We shall, of course, see that the samples have now also gone off to other accredited OPCW laboratories, and we'll await in the next week or so whether they come back with similar sorts of answers. I think with regard to the question of, well, was it Novichok, something that's so deadly, and yet these two individuals have managed to survive? That is an interesting question and invalid, but I think that we have to move away from the kind of textbook position that, it's such a super toxic material and therefore they are absolutely bound to die. And if they haven't died, then they clearly weren't poisoned by Novichok. There's so many variables there that mean that clearly whatever medical treatment has happened, as well as the physiology and the levels of intoxication that took place, means that actually they are getting better.
Can it not have been a small amount of Novichok that was used?
Well, that's one of the variables. It's quantity. We heard earlier on in the week that there's the possibility that it was actually on the doorknob. Who knows to say whether there was moisture in the air and a quantity of that material came off the doorknob and went on the floor, and therefore it wasn't touched. There's a lot of variables there, one of which is the quantity.
What does this mean for the investigation?
Well, as I said, I think it could be pretty significant because, of course, investigators can actually speak to Mr. Skripal now. They should be able to piece together a lot more that would have been unknown up until this point, and so therefore, yeah, it could be quite critical in taking this investigation forward.
As a security consultant, Jerry, do you think Yulia Skripal's cousin should be allowed in the country to see her?
Well, that's a very sensitive and emotive question, really. I guess there are the standard procedures that any immigration visa request would be, but clearly the focus of the world, and particularly the UK and Russia, is on this at the moment. So, for family humanitarian reasons, I think there should be no reason. But clearly the UK government will have to think long and hard about this and make a judgment call. OK,
Jerry, appreciate your time. Thank you.
The former Russian agent, Sergei Skripal, is no longer in a critical condition and is responding well to treatment. He's been recovering at Salisbury District Hospital after being poisoned with a nerve agent at the beginning of March. His daughter Yulia, who was also attacked, is said to be gaining strength daily. Britain says Russia is behind the poisonings, but Moscow has denied any involvement. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Leila Nathu is at Salisbury District Hospital for us this evening. Leila.
Clive, this is yet another extraordinary turn of events here in Salisbury, that after 4 weeks, more than 4 weeks in a critical condition here in Salisbury Hospital, Sergei Skripal is now recovering well. It was that attack on the former Russian intelligence officer and his daughter in the city that he had come to call home that triggered the crisis in diplomatic relations between London and Moscow. But their recovery is now introducing a new dynamic to the international tension. They were targeted with a chemical weapon. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were hospitalised more than a month ago after being exposed to a nerve agent, a toxic chemical designed to shut down the human body. But they have been fighting its effects. And today the hospital gave this update.
As Yulia herself says, her strength is growing daily and she can look forward to the day when she's well enough to leave hospital. I also want to update you on the condition of her father, Sergei Skripal. He's responding well to treatment, improving rapidly, and is no longer in a critical condition.
It was on the 4th of March that the two were found incapacitated in the centre of Salisbury. They were critically ill. A police officer who was one of the first to respond to the incident was also admitted to hospital. He was discharged a fortnight later. The Skripals had been heavily sedated and unable to communicate, but last week Yulia regained consciousness. Now her father too appears to be making progress.
It's fantastic news, somewhat unexpected I think. We were obviously concerned they were in a very serious state, but we heard earlier this week that Yulia is getting better. But to hear that Sergei himself is also recovering well is excellent news, and I hope to hear more encouraging news in the weeks ahead.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the Foreign Office said, "We are very pleased that both Mr. Skripal and his daughter Yulia are improving. This is a tribute to the hard-working and talented NHS staff in Salisbury who have provided outstanding care. The NHS will continue to provide ongoing care for the Skripals, both of whom are likely to have ongoing medical needs." Yulia Skripal is communicating. Yesterday, she put out a statement via police saying she was getting stronger daily. But it's not yet clear whether Sergei Skripal is recovering to the same extent. Yulia, and perhaps her father too, will now become crucial witnesses in the investigation, described by counter-terror police as one of the largest and most complex they have ever carried out. Leila Nathu, BBC News, Salisbury.
Well, our diplomatic correspondent James Landale is here. James, the recovery of the Skripals, what do you think that means for the police investigation?
Well, it means that the investigation now has two key witnesses that it didn't have before, potentially, who will be able to shed more light on what exactly happened on that day that the attack took place, but also any other wider context that might help the investigation. So I think it'll have a hugely significant impact on the investigation. But I think also it will open the door to more speculation, more alternative theories, suggesting perhaps that Russia wasn't responsible for this attack, as the British government says is highly likely. Because there will be people who say, well, we were told these people were going to be dying and now we're told they're recovering. Remember, the first reaction Vladimir Putin gave to this attack was to say, well, look, if this was genuine Soviet-era nerve agent, the Skripals would have died instantly.
And news tonight of a Skripal relative back in Russia.
Yeah, Victoria Skripal, a relative, was hoping to come to Britain to visit her relatives. But we've now learned that the British government has turned down their visa, a visa for her. Ostensibly, the immigration, the Home Office says that her application didn't comply with the usual immigration rules. But it was pretty clear the British government realised that she was going to be used by the Russian state to try to get access to the Skripals. And so they said, no, we think she was a pawn of the Kremlin. We won't give this visa.
OK, James, thank you. James Landale there.
The Salisbury spy attack took a dramatic twist today, with doctors saying Sergei Skripal, the suspected target, is making a rapid recovery and no longer is on the critical condition list. Comes a day after his daughter Yulia made her first public statement after recovering herself from the Russian nerve agent. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, said it's great news. Well, in a moment, the latest from the scene of the attack. But first, here's our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks.
It had been feared that neither Sergei Skripal nor his daughter Yulia would ever recover from the nerve agent attack. This footage, taken in a Salisbury shop just days before the poisoning, are some of the last images of Mr. Skripal in good health. But now, after a month in a coma in Salisbury District Hospital and a week after his daughter regained consciousness, there was this announcement.
I also want to update you on the condition of her father, Sergei Skripal. He's responding well to treatment, improving rapidly, and is no longer in a critical condition.
Speculation about Mr. Skripal's condition had intensified after Yulia's cousin Victoria went on Russian television. This, she claimed, was a recording of Yulia saying that her father was all right, that everyone was recovering, and that she'd be discharged soon.
We know from other people who have been exposed to lethal doses of nerve agents that they can make a complete recovery. So as long as they were stable and all the systems were being supported in hospital, their chances of recovery were always reasonable.
This afternoon, the Russian embassy released a statement saying, "We hope that the improvement of Sergei and Yulia Skripal's health will contribute to the investigation of the crime perpetrated against them. We're confident that an objective probe will ultimately establish that the claims against Russia by the UK government are null and void." In Moscow, the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov replied to reports that the UK had pinpointed a Russian military research base as the place that produced the Novichok. These are feverish attempts to find confirmation of their totally indefensible position, he says. We aren't going to trust them, we want to verify, but they won't let us. What the UK also won't do is grant a visa to Victoria Skripal, we've heard this evening. The Home Office says that her application doesn't comply with immigration rules. As the Skripals regain the ability to talk about what happened to them, what they can add to the investigation could be invaluable. And the British government will want to be very careful just who they tell it to. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, the Home Office.
And Juliet Bremner joins me live from outside Salisbury District Hospital. So, Juliet, what do today's developments mean for the investigation into the poisoning?
Well, certainly this was unexpected. I think when Yulia made that phone call allegedly to her cousin yesterday and talked about possibly being discharged soon, nobody really took it very seriously. And the hospital is still saying that that is pure speculation. But, and it is a big but, if Sergei Skripal and his daughter are capable of speaking now, it's a significant advance in this hugely complex investigation. Both security officials and the police will most certainly want to fully debrief them. There's even speculation they may have been doing that already, although we certainly don't know that for certain. And they must be seen as the key witnesses. They should or may be able to provide that all-important information about where this poison came from and who administered it.
Juliet, thank you. Well, those developments came as President Trump imposed further sweeping economic sanctions on 7 of Russia's richest men and government officials. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore joins me live now. So, Robert, who are these targets?
Well, look, Alistair, it's long been argued by Western diplomats that the real way to punish President Putin, but not ordinary Russians, is to follow the money, to target those sort of ultra-wealthy oligarchs, those who orbit the Kremlin, those who have earned their money through corruption and political connections. That's exactly what's happened. The US Treasury today sanctioning 7 oligarchs, including the well-known Oleg Deripaska, a man who has sought favors in both British and American political circles, but also 12 of their companies linked to those oligarchs and 17 other senior Russian officials. The White House is portraying this as an attempt to stand up to what they're calling Russian malign activities. In a statement just released, they cite the Salisbury nerve agent attack, but also cyber attacks on the US, military activities in the eastern Ukraine and Syria, and significantly interference in the 2016 presidential election. So this is really the White House standing up to what it calls those malign activities. It also in part answers the question of why, or at least whether President Trump has been unusually soft on the Kremlin. This suggests he's finally getting tough with his opposite number inside the Kremlin.
Robert, thank you.
A month ago, it was thought Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were close to death after the nerve agent attack in Salisbury. But today, the doctor responsible for Sergei Skripal's care says his condition has improved rapidly. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has the latest twists and turns in this international spy mystery.
The momentum of revenge gains velocity. This afternoon, the UK refused to grant Victoria Skripal a visa to visit the UK and see her cousin, Yulia, and uncle Sergei. And on Sergei, sudden, dramatic news.
He's responding well to treatment, improving rapidly, and is no longer in a critical condition.
After all he's come through, the years as agent, then double agent, the arrest and imprisonment, the handover to the West, and an allegedly quiet life in Salisbury and shopping trips. And tonight it's announced Sergei Skripal looks like surviving what is surely the world's most infamously amateur nerve agent attack. The British authorities, haplessly caught between blaming Russia and refusing to put up conclusive evidence, today revealed the attack left Sergei Skripal's pet guinea pigs dead from thirst at his house. A vet then had to kill his starving cat. But Salisbury Hospital says the man himself is no longer critical. The tale of the family pets, believe it or not, caused tetchy exchanges at the UN Security Council in New York last night. But that's nothing. Russia's ambassador accusing the British of Goebbels-like propaganda, then reading out a section from Alice in Wonderland.
Let the jury consider the verdict, the king said, for about the 20th time that day. No, no, said the queen. Sentence first, verdict afterwards.
Russia's man makes Russia's point. The British convict first, seek evidence later. From Alice to malice, malicious activity. This afternoon, the US accused 24 Russian businessmen and officials and 7 companies of doing just that and slapped sanctions on them. Here, the focus remains on why the British government blames Russia but won't disclose the intelligence evidence it claims to have. Sources have told Channel 4 News that the UK believes the Novichok nerve agent came from here. This is Russia's Shikhani chemical weapons base, 500 miles from Moscow, long used for wargaming and testing of battlefield chemical and nerve munitions. Few Westerners have ever been here, but a generation ago one Dutch journalist did gain access.
We did see the village, so to speak, or the military base called Shikhani, which, by the way, is protected or was protected back then by 3 security corridors, very well protected. We were received in the central community hall, cum theater of Shikhani, and later we moved on to the Shikhani testing grounds, where for decades the Soviet Union had been field testing chemical warfare agents, and on these testing grounds they had erected an exhibition site, so to speak, where all these different munitions were shown.
It's now thought British intelligence on this base was instrumental in convincing allies like France and the US to join UK action in expelling diplomats. Russia's foreign minister is underwhelmed.
If the British found out about some enterprise in Shikhani only yesterday, 1 month later, then I think this goes to show that they are feverishly trying to find new confirmations to their absolutely indefensible position.
The British contend they've long known about Shikhani and just keep saying all the evidence points to Russia. But since they won't disclose what the evidence is, their position begins to look a little old-fashioned. Trust us, we're the government.
Well, joining me now from Miami on a very delayed satellite line, I'm afraid, is Bill Browder, who has campaigned for Russian sanctions following the death of his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. What do you make of these US sanctions announced today? Will they really bite?
These sanctions will really bite. I've been one of the people most critical of the ineffectiveness of the U.S. sanctions program in the past. But in this particular situation, what the United States government has done is they've gone after the people who hold Putin's money and are basically going after Putin's money. This is a very, very significant step that the United States has taken, and it will hit Putin right between the eyes.
Now, in many ways, these sanctions seem rather stiffer than the action being taken in Britain. Would you agree?
That's absolutely right. And so, I mean, I'm surprised that, that the U.S. has been the one to go forward with these before Britain, considering that Russia has effectively committed an act of chemical weapons terror on British soil. But that doesn't mean that Britain can't follow. And shortly after the Skripal poisoning, I've been advocating for this exact measure to be taken. And I hope that Theresa May and her government will quickly follow suit and sanction the same people.
Do you think Britain has a different attitude towards some of these oligarchs, people like Oleg Deripaska, who famously entertained Lord Mandelson and George Osborne on his yacht?
I think that Britain has an entirely different attitude towards these oligarchs. They've been welcomed with open arms. Just using the Oleg Deripaska example, he's not allowed, he hasn't been allowed to travel to America for many years, but he has one of the most amazing houses in Belgravia in London. It's time that the British government roll up the welcome mat in London for these types of people, and it's time that they start sanctioning them like the United States has just done.
I mean, you've been campaigning on this for so long. Do you have any sense of why Britain has this attitude?
It comes down to money. It comes down to money. Basically, these people have been spreading their money far and wide. in London among people who are politically well-connected, and that money has led to a laissez-faire attitude, a let's look the other way attitude towards these people. And now, you know, it's come back to bite us all with chemical weapons in Salisbury, and so that has to be stopped.
What do you make of the way the British government has handled the Salisbury attack and what's been happening in the last 24 hours or so? It's been getting into these quite bizarre exchanges with Russia, accusing each other of Alice in Wonderland beliefs, of trying to believe impossible things, of fake news. And now Mr. Skripal seems much better than we thought he would be a month ago.
Well, first of all, let's thank God that Mr. Skripal and his daughter survived. That's the most important news. The second piece of news is that the Russians have failed at their assassination attempt. It doesn't mean that they didn't make an assassination attempt. We know that they do these things. We know that they did this thing. We know that they went after Litvinenko and killed Litvinenko. This war of words is standard operating procedure. The Russian government lies after every atrocity that it commits. It lied after invading Crimea. They lied after shooting down MH17. They lied after cheating the Olympics, and they're lying here. The most important thing is that Theresa May made a 5-point statement shortly after this chemical weapons attack. I'm sorry, could you repeat yourself?
I was saying they don't have a monopoly on lying.
That's true. There are many liars in the world, but in the world of government lying, I would say that Russia is world-class in terms of their lying. Almost everything they do is a lie. I can speak from experience. I have a full documentable dossier of their lies in relation to the murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. This is what they do. They've been doing it ever since the communist times. It's a different order of magnitude than other governments.
Bill Browder, thank you very much indeed.
Many of us had, I think, assumed that the Skripals could not possibly survive a Novichok attack. Indeed, in some media coverage, they had accidentally been referred to as murder victims. So their improvement has been an unexpected and welcome development. Salisbury District Hospital gave an update on them today. In response to recent media coverage, they said, a significant update on Sergei and more on Yulia too.
As Yulia herself says, her strength is growing daily, and she can look forward to the day when she's well enough to leave hospital. I also want to update you on the condition of her father, Sergei Skripal. He's responding well to treatment, improving rapidly, and is no longer in a critical condition. As you'll appreciate, I won't be giving any further details at this time.
Well, the whole affair, of course, remains a deadly serious business. But that being said, an information battle is underway between Russia and Britain, with moments of apparent farce. Russian and UK UN ambassadors quoting Alice in Wonderland at each other. Russia raising the issue of the Sergei Skripal's pet cat and guinea pigs, with a subsequent admission from the British they were left to starve and die in the sealed Skripal house. Other information about the case seems only to come out of the British after it's raised by Russia. If it is a propaganda war, it's not felt as though the British are actually winning this week. Well, I'm with Gabriel Gatehouse, who reports on Russia so often and so well for us. Gabriel, the surprise of Sergei Skripal coming through this and now being in a better condition. So much to talk about here. What do you think it means for the investigation itself?
Well, for the investigation, we've now got two potential witnesses who, number one, may remember something from the hours leading up to when they were poisoned, and number two, more broadly, Sergei Skripal may be able to give some idea of why someone might want to kill him now, because as it stands, we have no official suspects that we know of as to who actually carried out this poisoning. We only have accusations as to which country was behind it.
The diplomatic thing between Britain and Russia has been sort of strange to behold this week.
Rollercoaster ride.
And presumably that continues as well.
Yeah, well, we now have two live people who are recovering, as we understand it, at the centre of a diplomatic storm, and I think that makes a difference because it looks like Russia is keen to perhaps get them back to Moscow, and it looks like the UK is keen to prevent it. Victoria Skripal, the cousin of Yulia, the niece of Sergei, who we had on the programme yesterday, has been apparently refused a visa into the UK. A government source told the BBC that it appeared, quote, that the Russian state was trying to use Victoria as a pawn. Now, that may or may not be true. It probably is true, but this looks like another PR victory for the Russians. I mean, they've said today this clearly means that the decision has been taken out of purely political considerations. That's a quote from them. And their refusal to cooperate, they said, means that Britain has something to hide. As you said, it hasn't been a great week for the Brits. Quite apart from the guinea pigs and the cats that you mentioned, you know, Boris Johnson caught out exaggerating on Porton Down, the FCO deleting a tweet, this visa issue now. Russia has made hay out of this, but what we haven't seen for now is a crumbling of the coalition that the British put together on the diplomatic expulsions.
Okay. Wait there for a moment, because let's think about what this development means about Novichok itself, a group of nerve agents reported to be so much more deadly than other chemical weapons. Earlier, I spoke to a man who was working on the development of the nerve agent in the days of the Soviet Union. Dr. Vil Mizaranov, I need Gabriel to help me with that, Mizaranov, now lives in New Jersey. I asked him whether he was surprised that the Skripals looked likely to survive the attack.
I heard about that. Probably, first of all, probably they got non-lethal dose. Non-lethal dose, probably they got. After that, they got also injection of antidotes. And after that, sure, they had chance to survive.
Does it tell us anything about Novichok in general, though, that maybe this isn't as powerful as we've been saying? Or maybe that this particular sample of Novichok was older or not as pure, maybe not even made by the factory that you were working in?
If it's pure and military purity, it should be 10 times more potent than VX gas. But it's exposure to this Novichok gas, as in any nerve gas, is up to these methods of exposure that exposed this Novichok gas to the handle of door. Probably they use solution. They dilute it by solvent. It's already complicating penetration process, not giving immediately to the flow of blood. Such a circumstance probably allowed to survive these Skripals.
The Russians, as we look at their reaction to all of this, don't seem to be taking it very seriously. They seem to be almost laughing at us and mocking us. They've been talking about the pets and the way the pets were treated. What do you think the Russian game is here, the information game, if you like, or the propaganda game?
They need information from England experts. It's part of game, only part of game. Mocking and laughing, don't trust these games. Russians pretending.
Dr. Vil Mizaranov, thank you so much. Thank you for talking to us.
Yeah.
Well, Gabriel is still with me, and I don't know what you make of what we should think about Novichok in the light of the fact that 2 people appear to have survived an attack with it, Gabriel.
Well, just before we came on there, I spoke to Alistair Hay. He's a chemist himself, a very well-respected, level-headed expert on chemical weapons. He told me a number of things. He said, number one, that we in the media, and indeed Mr. Mirzyanov himself, seem to have over-exaggerated the power of Novichok's. He did not by the fact that Novichok's was 10 times stronger than VX, which you heard Dr. Vil say there. The second thing he said was that the Skripals will have survived, probably due to prompt and effective treatment, standard treatment for exposure to organophosphate poisoning. That will be the reason why they've survived. Now, the third thing he said is that numerous people in the past have been exposed to lethal doses of nerve agents and have survived, although there's only one case that we know of so far of somebody who was exposed to a Novichok and survived. Now, this was a guy called Andrei Zheleznikov. He was a colleague of Vilmir Zayanov's, a Soviet chemical weapons scientist. He was exposed to Novichok in 1987 when his hood malfunctioned. He described what happened at that moment. He said, circles appeared before my eyes. They were red and orange. There was a ringing in my ears. An antidote was administered promptly. He survived for 5 years, but eventually died a premature and pretty grueling death. Now, I have one other thing to report that Alistair Hay said, as I said, a chemist, very level-headed. He says he's still on the fence about whether it has to have been the Russians. Again, he's talking from a scientific point of view. He hasn't seen the intelligence.
Whether the chemical has to come from
That's right,
Russia.
but he says chemically it's clear that the Russians aren't the only people who could have made this nerve agent.
Gabriel, thank you very much indeed. Well, meanwhile, today, the US adopted a swathe of eye-catching new sanctions against Russia. Not just for Skripal poisoning, by the way, but for malign activity across the world, as they put it. The measures focused on friends and associates of President Putin and aroused an angry response. Russia said it would retaliate. Well, at the end of another extraordinary week, let's look at how effectively the West is dealing with Russia. I'm joined by Professor Louise Shelley. She's a leading authority on money laundering and financial crimes, the founder of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Centre at George Mason University. And Edward Lucas from the Centre for European Policy Analysis is with me too. Louise, if I can start with you, in terms of these sanctions today, what were they for, and were they more than perhaps was expected?
I don't think they were expected because it wasn't sure that President Trump would allow such sanctions to be placed on Russia. But these are much more potent sanctions than one could expect in our political atmosphere, and they are going at key political figures, friends of Putin, and key economic institutions. So they're hitting hard and very close to the Kremlin.
And the timing, I mean, we're obviously very preoccupied with the Skripal case. Should we think that the timing of it is related to the Skripal case? Because the US Treasury sanction press release has mentioned quite a lot of different parts of malign activity, to use their phrase.
I think it may also be timed to the departure of McMaster from the NSC and the effort to do something against Russia in this critical period. So yes, the US is being a supportive ally to Britain, but it's also expressing something that is deeply felt across parts of the US administration, and Congress is increasingly taking an assertive role in foreign policy in this country, and they're also concerned about Russia.
So this is Congress saying, this is what we want to do, and you know, let the president stop us, but this is what we think needs to happen.
Well, it comes out of the Treasury Department, but there are other parts of the administrative apparatus that have to support it, but Congress is being much more assertive. So it's a combination of the two, and Trump hasn't been able to stop it.
Right. Now, I'm going to put a question to Edward Lucas, and I'll put the same one to you in a moment. Edward Lucas, it is striking how tough some of their sanctions are against individuals on a different way that we've been doing this in the UK, because obviously we enjoy some of these people making money and earning money here, particularly in London in the financial district. Who's got it right and who's got it wrong?
Well, I think it's not striking, it's outright shameful that the Americans, despite all the bad things people say about President Trump and all the controversy about alleged collusion between his campaign and the Russians, they are hitting the ball out of the park on this. They've gone after really key people and hit them in a way that has got the Kremlin very angry. Yet the money laundering centre of the world is not actually New York, it's London. And we have got a measure, for example, to criminalise the misrepresentation of ownership of companies. It's a very good thing to do. If you turn up and say this is ABC Limited of British Virgin Islands and you don't say it's Evan Davis who owns it, if your lawyer lies about that, he goes to jail. That would be absolutely wonderful. Now, when do you think that's going to come in? The answer is not next month, not next year, 2021. I think it should be coming in next Wednesday. So I think it's a real wake-up call to the British government.
And Oleg Deripaska, the US Treasury put sanctions against him individually. His company, N+, is listed in London, had a flotation in London last year. It's chaired by a Tory peer. Does the British establishment need to change the way it basically treats some of these?
Well, absolutely. And I think that the way in which the bankers and lawyers and accountants in the city in general, not making any specific allegation, because libel lawyers are no doubt tuned into Newsnight right now with their pencils at the ready, because this big tactic the Russians use, have been the pinstriped accomplices of Russian money laundering. And it's a very small minority of this country, but they do very well out of it. And I think the government's got to take that on the chin, even if they are Tory party Jonas or otherwise connected to the Tory party.
Louise Shelley, do you think that there's a kind of inconsistency in the way the West is approaching this? And would it be better if we all sat down together and worked out one way in which we're all going to do it, rather than us dealing with someone who you're sanctioning, for example?
Well, there's certainly not consistency, and I'm certainly agreeing with Edward Lucas that our measures are much more hard-hitting. But we also need to be much more concerned in our society about beneficial ownership and who is behind the property and who is behind the investments. And you are ahead of us on that, but we're behind on knowing where all the money is in New York and Miami that has made these oligarchs so enjoy Western society. But now, with these sanctions, some of these people who are closest to Putin and in great positions of power will not be able to enjoy their properties overseas.
Yeah, it's very significant. Edward Lucas, let's talk about this sort of propaganda information war and the way that it just feels that the Russians have been getting information out of us because we haven't said it, and then they've said, what happened to the cat? And then we suddenly say, well, the cat was killed, and then obviously it raises, you know, big public reaction. What are we mishandling this? Well,
I think if there were an Olympics for disinformation, the Russians would win all the medals. They're really good at this. And you've got this here, a classic example of a sort of hybrid operation where there's something physical happened, that Mr. Skripal and his daughter have been poisoned. You've got a diplomatic side, you've got an information side. And they are playing this like an orchestra, and they're really good at it. And we have, basically, it's a very simple story. Russia does bad things. They've been doing it for years. When they do the bad things, they lie about it, from poisoning Litvinenko through to Estonia, Georgia, Ukraine. There's countless examples. This shouldn't be a surprise.
It should be easy to respond to that by simply telling the truth in a straightforward and open way, not hiding things that don't need to be hidden, and not having wrong tweets that confuse the evidence that you yourself have assembled. I mean,
I'd vote for you Foreign Secretary, Evan. I mean, you know, I think it's astonishing that we have. I mean, I do think that we have to take this really seriously. And in the past, in other circumstances, our politicians have really worked on, you know, what's the line, what are the talking points, what's the phraseology, what to avoid. And we used to be quite good at doing this. And now we have become, I would say, very amateurish. And the Russians, it's not so much the Russians have a good case, they're playing their tactics and getting and making hay while the sun shines. And I am worried that what comes next is going to be worse. I think there was a clear warning from them where they said, you're playing with fire, we will retaliate. And I'm rather nervous about what we're going to see next week. We won't like it.
Edward Lucas, thank you very much. And Louise Shelley, thank you very much indeed too. Before we move on, our own John Sweeney reported on one of those oligarchs put under sanction by the US today, Oleg Deripaska, and his connections with the British establishment a couple of weeks ago. And if you want, you can watch that film on our YouTube channel. The address is at the bottom of the screen.